Welcome to the next project. Today we're working on a tool that will help us shape the back of guitar necks. In this case I have a 25.5-inch scale length Telecaster style neck. Test routing that I just did, it turned out pretty good. But let's say you want to do something bigger like a 35-inch scale length bass neck. Can you use the same tool to do this? Well, what we're building you can. It will be a convertible tool. So what are we building? A great big box that has a movable end panel, and we can swap out the two different platforms. Right now it's set up for a 35-inch scale length bass neck, and this platform rotates. You run your router back and forth across the top and it routes away all the wood you don't want, and you are ready to start cranking out beautiful guitar necks. Let's start the next project.
All right, let's take a quick look at what we're going to be building. This is a convertible box. We're going to have it set up to put either a short scale neck blank in or a long scale neck blank. So if you want to build like a 25.5-inch Telecaster neck or a 35-inch scale length bass neck, we'll be able to do it in this contraption. So let's take a look at the parts. This is where it starts getting exciting. We are going to build a neck platform with a stiffener, and a stiffener is like a spine to make it tough. It'll have two end caps and pivot rods. Those come in handy because we're going to have shaping cams that go on the pivot rods. There are little spacers there too. We're going to have two end guide panels with slits in them, and the pivot pins roll up through that. We have bolts, bearings, and washers. That's what the cams are going to be riding against, and an end panel way over there. It's at the end. Two side box side panels, and these are part of the whole convertible idea. We got bolts. Yep, they're bolts for convertible boltness. And a router sled. And I originally started using a large router, but I downsized to like a palm router or a laminate trim router. So we got to decide what kind of necks we want to build. You know, strat neck, a hockey stick neck, or a Dean V-neck. And we have to take into consideration how big the headstock is going to be, how big the heel is going to be, total length if it has a tenon on the end. A lot of things we need to kind of plan up front, or just wing it. I like winging it. So we're going to start out with a slab of lumber that we're going to cut into the top of the platform, and a rib, a stiffener that goes with it. We're going to have two end caps that go with that, and we're going to round the top of those, drill a hole in it that the guide pins or the pivot pins will go into. And we're going to have, I think about said a male and a female version, but mama and papa, or no, a short scale and a long scale version. We will be making 3 end panels, all the same size material to start with. 2 of them will be the same. They'll have a slit and a hole in them. These are for the pivot pins and the bearings to go through. And the final end panel will be a little bit different. Now that we've got our end panels fit and our 2 different length neck platforms, we can figure out the distance that those different pieces are going to fit and find our overall outside dimension and cut our sides to fit that dimension. A lot of head scratching and guessing goes on about this time. There will be plans included. They'll be reasonably accurate. You can look at those and take it from there. Okay, so I'm going to start cutting some lumber, and the way I do it, I try to gang up as many cuts as possible. Anything that needs to be the same dimension gets cut at the same time, so I'm not resetting the saw in attempt to match widths or lengths of pieces of wood. Here I am cutting the neck cradle, cutting both the top platform part and the spline that goes with it, cutting them both to length at the same time so they're exactly the same length. Using a jigsaw, I actually scored the veneer on this piece of plywood, and that's to keep this cheap plywood from splintering all to pieces, which it did. Actually, it's not cheap, it's very expensive plywood. The quality of plywood these days is not what it used to be. And this is what they called Baltic birch plywood. Doesn't look like it, does it? Nope. It's not the same as it used to be. Centering everything up. Make sure you put center lines in pretty much every part that you're going to make for this project, and line up your center lines as best you can. Here I'm gluing, clamping, and screwing one of the neck platforms together, clamping it to my bench in an area that I know is as dead flat as I could find. I didn't want to take it in and clamp it to the kitchen countertop. Could have done that actually. That might be a good idea. Here I'm finding center of the two end caps. Going to mark them for not only where they fit on the platform itself, but where the center pivot hole will go on these. Again, notice there's a center line. Line up your center lines. Whenever you can, make sure the center lines are as accurate as you can make. Again, stacked both of them together to drill one hole through both so all the pivot holes are lined up nicely. Still stacked together, I'm sanding them to a top radius shape. That's just to make it pretty more than anything. Finding where they fit on the ends of the platform, marking it for mounting holes. We've got the mounting holes drilled and it's going to go on the end, something like that. I had just a little bit of a challenge figuring out how to hold this all together while I would put screws in it, and I decided just to push it up against the wall, which you can't see, but that wall is my extra set of hands holding things in place. Wiping off the extra glue that had squished out and making sure my center lines are lined up, and yes, they are. Life is good. A couple little scraps of wood there just to help keep everything upright and square to the world. Screwing in the other end cap and cleaning up a little more glue because I'm sloppy. It's looking pretty good. Ooh, a lot of glue. I'm really sloppy. Wow. Don't look. Look away. Look away. Okay, a little bit of super glue and squirt it in the hole and put some super glue on the threads of my pivot pin, which is a 1/4 inch diameter 1/4 bolt. Cut the heads off of those, and originally I was going to use 1/2 inch bolts, but I didn't have enough 1/2 inch bolts lying around. So downgraded or downsized perhaps to 1/4 inch bolts with the heads cut off, and those are my pivot pins. Looking good. Doing the same thing again, cutting as much gang stuff as possible, cutting my end panels. Here I'm only showing 2 end panels being cut because I do actually have a third piece already ready, but I'm not showing that because it's already ready. I have them stacked together, trimming them, making sure everything is square and equal size, finding center, putting a center line on it, checking some dimensions. Look at those great big drawings I have there. And they're not accurate, but they're a place where I started this whole process. So we got things marked out. Onto the router table, I have found my center line, and I'm taking a number of shallow passes to cut that center pivot slit into 2 of the end panels. Putting a little double-sided tape on them, sticking them together, make sure they're all squared up, and marking for another hole to be drilled. Drill through both panels at the same time to make sure the holes line up end to end of the panels. Driving in a T-nut, and I pointed there, and what that is, I left a little notch in the T-nut on the center line, and we'll see why in just a moment. Here I have the bearings in place, and I'm marking at the very bottom rotational part of the bearing, tearing it all apart again. A lot of put it together, take it apart kind of things going on there. And I drilled a little hole that is the size of a fat chunk of little pencil lead. Borrowed this idea from Randy's Guitars and Broncos. We'll take another look at that in just a little bit. Here we're doing a quick piece together of one of the neck platforms. It's all assembled. It has fake cam pieces on, and we've got both the short scale and the long scale together with the ends on it, so I can measure it so I know how long my side box panels need to be. I add a little bit. I think I added like 3 inches to the longest dimension because I want a little bit of room to get my hand in there and move things around. Again, we'll see more about that in just a few minutes. Here I'm test fitting things, making sure things are going to fit where I want them. There's a far end panel, which is like a big horseshoe shape. Again, there's a reason for that. Hopefully we'll touch on it in just a moment. getting some things squared up, finding my center of my plywood, drilling a few holes that are going to be used just to bolt this together. Eventually, this will be glued and screwed together solidly. But right now I'm only putting like 2 screws in each corner. Trying to get it square though, drilling through everything, making sure that my mounting screws aren't going a little crooked, twisting things out of square. And surprisingly, putting this box together took me a lot of time. It looks like, oh, this should take a half an hour. I don't know how much time I had in it, but it took a while. Here we are, test fitting, marking, measuring, getting a good idea for where everything is going to go before I drill some holes that will allow this to be truly convertible. Here we go, putting on some lines, marking, trying to figure out where the holes need to be. Oh, there's a side panel, and it's getting holes in it too. What can I be doing? Well, if the panel has to be convertible or movable, I have to have a way to mount it when it's in place. I thought about just using like construction screws or drywall screws, but I figured that would tear out pretty quick. So I drilled it for some 1/4-20 threaded anchors. And I know since I'm going into the side of plywood, you can't just thread those in because it'll just spread the plywood apart. So I clamped the plywood after it was drilled, soaked it with super glue, threaded the inserts in, and they're holding really well. During the assembly of this, I'd snagged my elbows and my forearms on the sharp corners of the end panels a few times, and I decided, well, I need to clean that up a little bit. I wanted to make it more presentable, in case company comes over and sees this thing, they won't go, oh, what a piece of trash. So I'm making it decorative, adding rounded corners to the tops, and also getting ready to add the spring loading for the pivot pins. However, I'm not using springs like some smart people do. I'm using rubber bands like other smart people do. If you research this, you'll find people are using bungee cords, springs, all sorts of stuff. We are ready to make our initial set of hockey puck form ends for our carriage, I think. Is that what I'm calling this thing? I don't know. We've got an old neck clamped in here at the back end, and I made a temporary wedge clamp using the existing tuner holes in the headstock. So we're going to use this to make our first set of radius ends for cutting. Does that make sense? I don't know. This whole thing's a little confusing, but the plans will help a little bit. Let's take the next step as we continue the next project. It is time to start thinking about how this thing will work in the end, and we're doing a quick dry assembly of it here. And I have a router base set up that has a 1.5 inch offset spacer right down the middle on the center line. What that does is it pushes the neck down to the depth that the router bit will be running. In this case, 1.5 inches from the bottom of the base. Here I'm using an idea that I am borrowing from Randy's Guitars and Broncos. It's using a piece of pencil lead pushed through that little hole that's just below the bearing to mark the rotation, projected rotation shape of the neck onto these end cams. That's ingenious. Thanks, Randy. Doing a little rough cutting of the cams, getting close to that radius shape that we drew on there with the pencil lead. This could be done with a jigsaw or a handsaw or whatever you have. I happen to have the bandsaw close at hand, and now I'm at the sander. And I'm basically sanding 1/2 of the radius at this point. Take a piece of paper, fold it in half so I have a center line on my piece of paper. Put that against the center line on the cam that I'm making. Now I've traced it so I have 1/2 of the shaped cam traced on both halves of the folded paper. Now I have a template on paper that I can double check against the cam that I'm sanding. Wow, is that as confusing as I can make it? Look at that though. The pencil line is just peeking around all the way around. I did nice work on this one. Pretty proud of myself. I don't think it's a cam I'm going to use though. Anyway, we're back to the neck platform and putting it together. Gonna slip it right into the box. Thread our bearings in place. And it rolls back and forth like that. You can put a baby to sleep on this thing. This is brilliant. Nice. All right, we've got some of the dirty work done now to do a test. We have a pine neck blank test. Surrogate test neck. I don't know what you call it. That's a fake neck. We're just doing a test. And I'm using my large router with a base that I set up for this. However, this is about when I realized that that large router has too big of a footprint for what I want to do. I'm running into kind of the end at the headstock and also down by the heel where I'm trying to clamp this. Not working out really good, but that's okay. We're learning. We're still doing test work. Otherwise, the routing that it did, the cams worked out really good. Pretty happy with that part. Checking my first routing test, and at the neck we have 88 hundredths. At the heel we have 97, almost 98 hundredths. Well. We have our first routing test done, and it went pretty well. Not perfect, but pretty well. I'm running kind of tight spacing. As this rolls, there's the potential for it to hit the bottom of the router base as it slides back and forth, especially as the headstock flares. Really need to look at that when I get to doing the LP angled headstock type routing test. But for now, one thing I noticed, it's not a perfectly smooth routing. There is a little faceting to it, which is kind of to be expected. I'm doing linear passes on something that's rotating. I might try a little bit different style bit, maybe at least for a final pass to smooth it out. This isn't bad. I think it would sand out pretty easily, but if we can find something that does a better job, then maybe we'll go with that. What we're really looking at with this fixture is just to get a uniform and even and reasonably fast shaping to the back of the neck. This is pine with a MDF fingerboard attached to it for thickness. But it's a good starting point. It's giving us a rounded shape, so that's good. It's going in the right direction. A little more tweaking needed. All right, we're going to keep chipping away at this, so let's get back to the next project. The first test done, and we've learned some important things from it. First was, even though I wanted to use my larger router for this, the reality was that it just kind of gets in the way. So I needed to move on to a smaller palm router or laminate router, whatever you want to call it, which means I need to make a new router sled platform base for a smaller palm router. So I'm overthinking this greatly, but I thought it was an interesting process to watch. I basically grabbed a big chunk of paper and started drawing, not even with a sharp pencil. I was using a marker. Really, the plan was hatching as I was drawing it out. So, sometimes you got to work on the fly, make it up as you go. And in general, it worked pretty good. However, as we'll see maybe a little bit later, the direction I have the router base placed on this router sled puts the power cord sticking out with the length of this old box. I should have turned the router 90 degrees so the power cord was exiting to the side of the box instead of with the length of the box. What happens is, and we might see it in the video, the power cord ends up trying to drop down along the path of where you're routing, so it kind of gets bunched up and it's in the way. So I have to flip it over my shoulder and just kind of hold it out of the way as I'm routing. So it's another distraction, not the end of the world, but if you make something like this, try to plan ahead, figure out which way your power cord is going to be exiting the platform, have it going off to the side instead of with the length of the box. Test routing number 2, and we're doing a base scale length test neck routing this time. We have the palm router set up and the new router base, and there you can see the cord. I've got it slung over my shoulder now, so it's kind of in the way. It needed to be turned 90 degrees so it's exiting off the side of the box, but that's really not the big problem I'm having. Right about now I'm going, what the heck is going on?
Okay, so strike two against this first test, working on the base neck. First, I had the clamp of the base of my router moving just a little bit. So I tightened up the clamp part that grabs around the motor. So that's tight. I did a few more passes and I still kept getting a progressive deeper cut. And you can see how much gap there is right here between the collet that clamps the bit into the motor shaft and out here. That's not where I started out. So this is a good safety tip too, and it's in there tight. The collet is tight. The problem is, well, could be a couple things. One, this shaft is a little dirty. It's got a little rust or something on it, I don't know. That will cause a catastrophic failure. If the collet can't grab onto the bit well, the bit will work out. I've seen it happen before. I've had one fly by me in a shop area before. You hear a zing and you hear a bang bang and you're like, what was that? It'll destroy the collet, it'll destroy the bit and anything in its path, people, tools, machinery. It's a bad thing. So this is a learning experience here. Make sure this is tight all the time. I quite often will chuck this up, tighten it, put it in the router, set it aside, do something else, come back to it and go, was that tight? So I'll tighten it again. But now, even though this is tight, there's apparently, I'm guessing, either some contamination in the collet itself, maybe some sawdust in there, or a little bit of rust or corrosion on the shaft, the shank of the bit that we need to clean up. So I'm going to take this apart, clean it all up, make sure the collet is clear and clean and has a good clamping surface, and also the shaft of the bit itself also. Sorry, we're way off topic, but this is important stuff. If you buy a router at Lowe's and just start routing, you don't know about this stuff. It's something you need to hear about or read about or experience, which is a terrible thing. I hope nobody ever experiences a bit coming out of a router. It's not a good thing. We're all lucky to live through stuff like that. So anyway, I'm gonna fix this up and we're gonna continue trying on this neck, this test neck, which is destroyed, but we're learning some stuff the hard way. Isn't that the way it goes? We'll be right back.
All right, everything's fixed. Our first base neck test is done. A new blank stuck in the contraption and routing away again, and things are going much better now. Got the router fixed up, cleaned up, set up properly. This particular test, second test, is really a big success. Still learning things, which is okay. I think we're about ready for the real deal. All right, we have finished up our second long scale base routing. It turned out really good. I did make new cams after the first failed attempt to carve this, which we had a number of problems, which we have seen in the video. I didn't like the depth of cut or the width of cut on the first round, so I did make new cams. Basically traced the old cams, adjusted dimensions where I thought they needed to be. Came back for routing number 2, did my initial cut. Thought there could be some more minor refinements. Anyway, pulled the radius cams off, did a little more sanding, put them on, did a final thin pass on this. It looks really good. Also, we'd have to do final shaping up here and down here. I mean, you could leave it like this. Punk rock. But this turned out great. We've also done our standard 25.5 inch guitar scale and now our 35-inch bass scale. They both went really well. I was very happy with the cams the first round on the standard guitar scale, so that went well. I'll use those cams on an upcoming project that I should have been working on this weekend, but I was doing this instead. Experimenting is good. We learn a lot from trial and error. Failure is our friend, remember that. I have a really good friend in failure. There will be a set of plans for this, and don't take those plans as gospel. They are a starting point. You need to measure, verify everything. There may be errors in my plans. I apologize if there are, but it's on you to build it right, not on me. I will do my best to make the plans as accurate as possible, but center lines, put on perfect center lines everywhere. Your neck needs to be centered on the cradle
cradle needs a center line. The center line of the cradle should line up with center lines where the pivot pins go through. Your cams need a center line on them. They need to line up with everything else. Your router needs to be centered on the center lines, so everything needs to center to start with. If you make some cuts and things are off at one end or the other, something is out of line, clearly. Whew, I'm rambling too much. Anyway, thank you very much for hanging with me through this project. It's been really educational for me. I learned a lot. I have other ways to make necks, but I wanted to give this a try, and I have a neck that I should be building right now, and I use that as an excuse to make this. So that's how I work. Take care of yourself and those around you. Until next time, bye.
And here we have a little bit of a treat at the very end. For all of you who have stayed with me this long, what you're seeing here is the making of an actual neck for a real project. Some of you who have been hanging out with me lately have noticed a Les Paul project that I'm working on that guitar needs a new neck. Well, this is the neck. So this is nice to put this whole project, this neck shaping contraption, to use and make sure it works, which we figured out through our testing. And I'm actually using a different bit here. I'm using a 1-inch bowl bit. Originally in my testing, I was using straight bits and spiral cut bits, which worked well, but this bowl bit I'm finding to be far better. That's interesting. A lot more testing to do, more necks to make in the future. Yes, it takes a while to build this box, this contraption, but I think in the long run, it's going to make far better quality necks that are repeatable. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel. I would greatly appreciate it. Hit the thumbs up button, because if you like this video, YouTube will like what you like, and I'll like what they like, and I'll like what you like. We'll all like it together. That'd be great. Please leave a comment. Love hearing from everybody all around the world. Ring the bell for future notifications, and do other good stuff too. Whatever comes to mind, just do it. Thank you very much for hanging with me through this project. Hope you've enjoyed it. There will be plans in the description to be downloaded for free. Free. Please take care of yourself and those around you. Until next time, bye.